Chapter 35 The Summit of War.
Narration has fallen.
This word arrives only half of a dozen hours after my fated battle with Saba. I could not resist the urge and clutch of a wilting consciousness at the conclusion of my parting with my dear friend. Nevertheless, this message has shaken me alive. Was there nothing that could have been done? Are there any survivors? I grip my chest in hopes that I may quell the burden and stay the mass of anticipation as I wait for her response, and as though it were a flame to be extinguished by way of suffocation.
Half of the city has survived. King Elementa ordered an evacuation as soon as he came to the realization that they were no match for the god.
Fatima pauses for my reaction. I cannot give her one, thus she continues.
And all is not lost. The now militant refugees of Nalarta, joined by the armies and militias of all the other Omani cities, traveled to convene and meet with another force. Rielindur has prepared a formidable army. He has vested his trust in your claims, and it has dawned upon him what his fated role shall be. The king of the Omani will meet with the prophet of the Tamas. Their queen has loaned full authority of the Tamas military to Rielindur. You must join them as a strategist and as a pivotal piece towards their efforts.
How can I? Ought I not go directly to Tiamattu? Must he not be slain by me? We cannot expect him to patiently wait for an army to appear before his doorstep. I emphasize, with a great distress, this blatant supposition of mine. Were I the pale god, I would allow no time for a counter-offense.
As you are now, you will surely fail. I overestimated your ability and underestimated his. I had forgotten just how powerful Parias had been. Tiamattu grants us time because he has need for his own. His power has not fully returned to him. He cannot weaponize his intentions without his full divinity. The pale god was cooped up and tightly restricted for over a millennia. His eradication of half of Nalarta was but a warm-up for him. He was simply stretching.
Her words contradict themselves. Why ought I remain idle and allow for him to recover all of his strength? All the more reason for me to hurry to him, I respond.
Hearken, En. You mustn't distrust my guidance. You are not ready. This frantic nature of yours will get you killed. Then there will be nobody to stop him. Make yourself steadfast and heed my warning.
Her voice grows stern. Rising from my spot next to my deceased friend, I claim my footing. I am in awe at my recovery. Nothing hurts. Nothing is broken. My wounds have sealed themselves, though I bear their scars. Fatima notices my astonishment.
Your final stage as a Drakin has bestowed an enhancement to an already passive ability in which I see you've just now come to discover.
Yes. So, your kind possesses wildly impressive regenerative capabilities, I say to her as I clench my hands repeatedly, testing their renewal. 5 or 6 hours of deep sleep is equivalent to weeks of medicinal intervention and months of rest for the lay Omani. In our society, the only method of rejuvenation greater than this lie in the waters of Silver Creek. And outside of it, only EVR's revitalization is greater than my own, for he recovers even during battle, whilst I, leastwise, require rest for the healing to take root.
Go now, back to the vast desert, into the Valley of Fangs, where the armies of Omani and Tamas converge. Sit with the king, prophet, and their respective commanders. You've always dreamt of an alliance between your species, and though I am sure you wished for its conception to arise from more peaceful circumstances, we are given no such privilege today.
Her point is clear. With all that has transpired and what is presently at hand, I barely took interest in the union that I had striven for. I grew to recently believe that that version of me was gullible and naive. Yet, here I stand corrected, in some sense, at least wise in part. Regardless of the situation that forced this collaboration, it is indeed happening. I shall not lose sight of this. However, I also shall not forget what extremes were required for such a thing to take form. A tent, large enough to house a few hundred warriors, stands erect in the center of a plethora of smaller interwoven ones. Torches trail and light paths between them all, leading to the grand middle. At the west end is a large crowd of Tamas hailing from all of their various tribes and clans. To the east is the Omani from Nalarta, along with the noble rulers of the cities and villages whom answered their king's call to arms, and all of their constituents. Flutara riders circle above. Emanating from them are protective umatic barriers bestowed upon them from our wolves, shielding them from Tiamatu's death upon the skies. Below, dozens of shenat and onyx are hitched to bone spears jammed deep into the desert sands. From this distance and height, the summit is the sole place of light within hundreds of Kalama. Pitch blackness surrounds them, waiting with eternal patience for the flames to be doused and snuffed out so that it may devour them too. All of the vegetation of Oma has wilted, and as a consequence, the animals higher up the natural hierarchy are also becoming scarce. Food and supplies have dwindled since Sa's expulsion, and this is more than evident here at the summit, where rations are low despite this only being the beginning of their campaign. Yet, this display that they threw together still emits a sense of courage, power, and greatness. Everything is broken except the spirit, and if the spirit lives on, so too will our races, regardless of the adversity or the opponent. As I approach the west entrance, I shed my Drakin skin and the warriors of the Tamas clear a path for me. Their chatter rings and grows as I make my way through and about them. Some beat their drums, thrash their chests, and clank their swords in rhythm. Others chant my name to the rowdy tempo. A few of the elders salute me in the way a wolf would in Alpha, followed by a friendly chuckle as though they themselves cannot believe what they do. I am taken aback by the overwhelming esteem. Among a sea of Tamas, I am greeted with dignity, compliments, and awe. They all know why I am here. They knew that I was coming. I purposely chose to enter through the west wing to gauge their perception of me. But also, I cannot bear to look my kind in their sorrowful eyes. I was not there when they needed me most. 2 twin Tamasu warriors with crossed pole cleavers are the guardians of the grand tent. Immediately recognizing me by the chants that accompanied my trek, they uncross their locked weapons and pull the curtained entryway back, revealing the ambitious meeting of mortals come together against that which cannot be killed. A great multitude of Tamas and Omani, haphazardly mixed, are gathered around an elevated stage and table with the main actors encircling it. The Tamas and Omani flags are perched at each end. Upon the table is an articulate mold of the lands between the Valley of Fangs and the taken Nalarta. I take note of the king, who is seated next to his 2 highest-ranking Royal Alpha generals. I am familiar with neither of them, but they both don the ribbon of the Royal Guard. One in particular persuades my interest, as one of his arms is treed, and though it coaxes one to believe it is a false limb, this is betrayed by the animation of his fingers. Rielindur sits with Eviar at his side. Some, unbeknownst to me, Tamas generals and even Yindra is amongst the mix. The high-velocity jabbers and discussions are ceased by the evidence of my arrival. All of them look to me in some savage bewilderment, save for Yindra and Rielindur. They smile at my coming.
"Won't you join us, incarnate of pariahs?"
Rielindur's strained vocals, though low and rumbling, pierce through the silence. A bustling of gasps from the surrounding crowd immediately follow once their suspicions of my identity are satisfied. Whispers and hushed gossiping fills the grand marquee. I nod towards all at the high table and make my way up to them. I am amidst a league of extraordinary individuals, those living legends whose names ring true across every terrain that stretches like a blanket over Oma. I bow to the king and to Rielindur, then salute the rest of them.
"Make yourself comfortable in. You've earned so much more,"
Alamanta says to me whilst putting a keen eye to my motions and body language. Thank you, Your Highness. I bow again and proceed to sit. I dare not stare too long. This is, after all, my first encounter with the king. Yet, from my brief glances, I did scour his frame and stature for any minuscule weight of evidence as to why he is deserving of the position of king. I found none. Beneath the fine and illustrious garments of royalty, the that fills him does not uphold a symmetrical value. I've been able to activate and shut off at will my Drakin eyes without engaging in a full transformation. A covert pair of lenses can never be underappreciated.
let us continue. Evia, inform N of what we've discovered thus far, and...
Rielindur is unapologetically cut short by the king, making for a displeased and growling Eviar.
Do I measure up to your expectations, Wolf?
Alamanta stares directly at me. How does he know? I but barely got a glimpse of him. He is not quite reading my mind, but rather his assumptions maintain a semblance of clairvoyance. I meant no disrespect. I am not familiar, nor are many ordinary Omani of how powerful our king is. Only that by some other merit outside of combat have you ascended to the throne. You've managed to court each of the noble families, and you hail from a line in relation, albeit distant from the last king. Forgive me. I only meant to know how you accomplished such a feat.
Battle is not all there is to life,
He responds with an honest grin. He certainly had partial claim to his crown, for his familial origin hails back to the very first king of Nalarta, but he is several degrees removed in comparison to other candidates. This is true, but today it has suddenly become everything. I smile to return his, but the message does not fit the messenger in this moment.
Rest assured, Anne. I am, or rather, my is more than meets the eye, even if that eye is Drakin.
He had detected the use of my inherited sight. For some unfounded reason, I believe him. My reluctance to do thus at first glance is stifled by his astute awareness. I suppose, in his position, it is better to be cunning than it is to be mighty.
Rielindur, I offer my sincerest apologies for interrupting you, for you, too, are to play a pivotal role in this, insofar as I am told by my scholars.
He beams at Rielindur in earnest.
Please, go on, and do forgive me, General.
The king instructs Eviar, who then turns to face me. Eviar displays no familiarity, nor does he acknowledge me as someone he's already met. He is composed and primed for only the purpose at hand. Nothing more, nothing less. Pointing to the shapely design of the mold in front of us, he hovers his finger over the Omani capital and begins.
Tiamat has seized Nalarta, as you already know. He has not moved from within the walls of the palace since his assumption of it. We have scouts, both Damas and Omani, who are making thorough examinations of the surrounding perimeter. It does not appear as though Tiamat has any intentions on leaving there until his power has fully returned to him.
I'm sorry, but how exactly do you know his power is incomplete? I ask, erringly over-hinting my suspicion.
We haven't all forgotten those old stories,
The king responds proudly.
and we are already at work reassembling them. As I've just alluded, my scholars are toiling away as we speak.
I see. He is a shrewd student of history and does not discredit the old scrolls and books as myth. It is pleasing as well as daunting, knowing how much detail there is in them. These can be easily and carelessly overlooked. And they apparently have been, for I am rather shocked to discover that they are in need of reclamation and restoration. Perhaps we shall one day again possess the full breadth of them.
As elucidated by your king, Tiamat will call upon the creatures of the night to defend his position until he has recovered all of his strength and divinity. There is reason to believe this has already begun. We cannot simply expect a battle. Instead, we must prepare for war. We will assault your former capital in waves. Structurally, Tiamat was keen on keeping the damage of his solo siege to a minimum for this purpose. It is likely that he plans to use the high walls and citadel to his advantage.
Minimum? If that is what is referred to as minimum damage, I dread to see the god unrestrained. Or even Eviar's idea of ruin. If he calls to the creatures of the night, there is one in particular that we ought all know of. His name is Amharam, an ancient necroshif, one unlike all others. He is supremely intelligent in relation to his extinct ilk, and has harnessed the abilities and powers of countless species from this world and dozens before it. The expulsion of Sa has awoken him, and he means to consume all, even Tiamatu. I starkly warned them and hold nothing back.
Our enemies have become many. This, however, does not change our strategy. Tiamatu is of the utmost concern. This Amharam can be caught in the crossfire or dealt with after the war.
One of the royal alphas firmly insists, and with more authority than I had expected for him to carry. Do not underestimate this creature. I was powerless against his unspoken blood commands. I did not fully acknowledge his powers as such back then, but it resonates now that that was exactly what gave cause for his bizarre propensities. Yes, they were certainly blood commands.
Ostensibly, the situation is exceedingly more complicated than we originally perceived. However, I cannot say that I do not agree with the General Alpha.
Relindor looks to him for his name. He begins to respond, and Relindor interrupts him, finishing his answer for him.
Gravata, right. That's what it was.
The Alpha shows an astonished countenance, likely wondering how it is that Relindor came about his name.
I concur with Gravata in that we must focus first and foremost on the god of suffering.
He gestures Eviar to proceed.
The first wave will consist of our most durable warriors. Those of us, I included, with the most bare might and endurance. We shall clear a path for the second wave and absorb the bulk of the damage. The majority of our casualties will likely be seen here. The second wave shall be composed of sensory wolves and assassin raiders who can map out any remaining enemies, hidden or otherwise, and dispose of them. The third wave will be those of us who can generate the greatest amount of explosive force, and those of us who possess ensnarement and trapping capabilities. Once we've weakened and entangled the god, we will be favorably positioned to unleash the Omani's greatest weapon against him.
Eviar regrants the duty of elucidation back to Elementa, who graciously assumes authority. The Orbital Guardian. It is a secret reservoir and cannon of collected and cultivated by the Alphas of Oma high above our atmosphere for 8 generations in preparation for any violent threat formidable enough to warrant its use. A confident smirk erupts upon his countenance. He is proud of such an excellently constructed weapon, though I, and surely the Tomas, know it must have originally been devised for them. And what role do I assume in all of this? I ask with an eyebrow raised.
You are to be our last resort, and not before I take my part,
Relindor answers. Ought Tiamat to survive an onslaught from a united army of Tomas raiders and Omani wolves, what makes you believe that I can exhibit a greater peril to him? If the Orbital Guardian fails, how then can I have any hope in succeeding? I am inescapably aware of the timidness of what I am saying, and that it does not mirror the actuality that I am the incarnate of the greatest warrior in Omani history. But I cannot help but to challenge the absurdity of their so-called last resort. A mixed sensation of coiling shock and a running chill twists up my spine in that very moment. Urgent, unmistakable danger has entered my sensory field of instinct. All of my senses point above me. Activating my weightless command to avoid causing a mess, I press my feet against the meeting table and push off, flipping backwards over my chair and onto my feet without so much as trembling the table itself. A fortified metal hammer, it being twice my size, comes crashing down upon my evacuated chair, splintering it into shards and dust. Attached to the handle of the giant gavel and sitting kneeled atop it is a Tomas warrior I haven't seen before. To my right, a wolf shouts a command.
Commands! Glass prison!
A long and prismatic glass hallway erupts into existence, confining me inside of it. Another tentacled raider dashes to its outer wall. The originator of my trapping opens a small gap for him as he shoves his feeler through it, introducing some sort of acidic or combustible gas inside. To my left, another gap is opened, just cramped enough for a fiery spear to fly right in. I mobilize my final Draken stage, assuming the fumes would ignite from the flaming projectile. And that they do. I intercept and catch the soaring spear. The glass corridor is robbed of all of its air, and it is replaced by a perfectly contained yet raging inferno. Though a spectacular show of teamwork between the 3, otherwise contradictory, soldiers, this level of attack is far beneath me now. The heat and the size of the flames do not align. I wouldn't deploy such a spectacle as anything more than an intimidation tactic, but they meant for it to do damage. The flames dwindle and die, and the smoke clears through the exits formed for the attack. To the astonishment of everyone watching, not including Yindra, Eviar, and Relindor, I am unscathed, unburned, and unsullied. Elementa gestures for the ambushing wolf to be at ease. Eviar does the same with the 2 raiders. The glass trap dims and fades from reality. My apologies, En. But as king, I must gauge the strength of our races. No, our world's final hope. He speaks nonchalantly and amusingly whilst looking around the table to each present and then back at me. Despite the outrageous, untimely test of my ability, my thoughts wander from it almost entirely. I keep running EVR's tactics through the pages of my mental imagery, scribbling, erasing, editing, and redirecting aspects of it, time and time again. Elementa takes notice of my halved presence. And I conclude that you are more than adept to handle this monumental task. More adept than anyone else we have, at the very least. But, my dear pup, you mustn't divert yourself in so many directions at once, he advises with another smirk. Truly, he is clairvoyant. I mean no disrespect. I am simply distracted in my digesting of the stratagem presented before me. Here I am apologizing for not being fully present to my attacker. A strange predicament.
Do not trouble yourself with the details. We shall compose and arrange the efforts. Focus instead on your own conviction. We may call for you during the third wave.
Rielendor attempts to assure me, though not with the success he'd hoped for. I nod in a halfway fainted agreement.
Where is Saba?
EVR asks. I killed him. I can respond only with a scope of forced indifference and numbness to the question. The Tomas crowd grows uneasy. In reaction, the Omani, too, develop a defensive stance. I've unsettled the room.
He was your guide. What happened?
Rielendor assumes the reins of the investigation, but for some odd reason, I believe he knows more than he leads on. He swore an oath to Tiamatu from the very beginning. He is the reason the Pale God has been released. I tell them, my chest out and feet firmly planted, ready for any repercussions they may hurl at me. The fused congregation erupts into an inhospitable debate with all involved. The noise of the commotion is expeditiously halted. Quiet! Elementa takes a stand, his voice reverberating throughout the canvas. Whether he speaks truth or not matters little. Understand well that N is likely the only individual in all of Oma who can do anything about Tiamatu. Decide after our war, in trial or battle if need be, whether he is guilty or innocent. To bicker about it now is useless and counterproductive to our primary aim and focus. He retakes his seat. The tent falls silent.